Not long ago, we shared with you our journey with dealing with depression in marriage, and some of you asked for how to deal with depression as a parent. So today's video is about that. But first, we're tackling chicken cacciatore. So if you're unfamiliar with our story, Josh had experienced depression when he was a teen, and then it came into our marriage in a pretty serious way when we had our third baby. And it was enough of a clinical depression that he was actually off work for several months. I'll link the story right here in the cards if you want to get caught up. Big flow. We're friends. So, I'm eating.
Hold on. Finish chewing first.
Well, anybody else love pork rinds as much as the Cannings do? Let us know in the comments below. I think the most important place to begin is with accepting the reality. And that it is something that is in your marriage, something that is in your family, and that it has impact.
It wouldn't be helpful to project out into the future that forever I will feel exactly this way. I will struggle exactly this much, my thoughts will always be this way. That's not helpful either, but neither is it helpful to say, you know what, maybe everything's fine and hunky-dory, and it can really set you up for frustration and self-blame, because the reality is this thing is here. And needs to be accepted in order to build the best life around it.
Do you want to know a really cool reality? A very true reality. This girl is so cute. You are so cute.
Yeah, like accepting reality. Like, we were just in the hospital last week with Colleen. She had an RSV virus. We were back in the hospital with her for a extended period of time. And Lisa shared in a previous video about how part of her wanted to just keep thinking, we'll go home today, or we'll go home tomorrow. And it wasn't helpful. It actually just led to a lot of frustration and, unnecessary pain, rather than to accept that, no, we might be here for a while. We have to deal with this as it is and build our expectations around that. And I think it's a similar thing with living and parenting with mental illness.
An example of accepting the reality of mental illness kind of leads to the next point, which is that you need to not compare. I think this is a really important point and very difficult for me in the beginning. I remember in the beginning, I would just look at other families, either that I knew or families that I knew online or whatever, and I'd just be like, oh my gosh, like, why can't we just do that? Or why can't we just, whatever, be at this event? Or why can't we
do things at this pace?
And I would compare in the beginning and be like, there's something wrong with Josh. What I think is so important is that we don't put blame. We don't say, oh, there's something wrong with him. Why can't there be something wrong with you? Do you know what I mean? Rather than put all this like shame and blame and guilt on the spouse with mental illness, what if your perspective is the perspective that's not the most helpful? I know for myself, I struggle with having a very specific picture of how something has to go. So like, just to give you an example, like a Sunday, I can get very stubborn and fixated on, well, Sunday has to look like this. It has to look like mass and all the children are behaved, and then we all go out for a delightful walk and have artisanal coffee, and then we take pictures for Instagram, and then we go to like a fair, and then after the fair...
we take pictures for Instagram. They're not good enough.
And then I can get a bit challenged sometimes when reality doesn't match my expectations. And so what I think it's so important, because people with mental illness, in my experience, not just from Josh, but from talking to many different spouses who support people with mental illness, is that a lack of intensity is really important sometimes. Sometimes we just, all of us need to just chill. You know what I mean? And it's not really fair for me personally to expect my spouse to be at this level of like similar intensity. I can't expect everybody, even my kids, like anybody. It's not fair for me to expect people around me in life to be at the same level of intensity and match the same picture perfect Sunday that I have in my head, especially when I haven't communicated it, right? And so I think that's another really important thing to note, is that your picture of ideal may not be what is actually ideal for your family. Maybe what might be ideal is you take turns. So you take all the kids, like one spouse takes all the kids, so that the spouse with mental illness can take a very quiet moment, be recharged, and then you all come back together and you do that fun thing that you were thinking of. I don't know. What would you say to that?
To the high capacity spouse loving a parent who has mental illness, there might be a opportunity to look at, is that the best family decision, or is that maybe just my preferences, right? And I guess as spouses, we all have to look at where our preferences may be creating problems. But no, I think that's a valuable thing when you're able to look and say, maybe this is an unnecessary standard I'm creating. Let's find something that actually won't cause more difficulty or challenge later on. But on the topic you just raised about finding quiet space, it's funny, but like we've talked about this, where if you sometimes build margin into the life of somebody who is struggling with depression or anxiety or something, they are able to get a bit more of a, wind in their sails to engage in activity. So sometimes it's about just sort of spacing things. Like you've done days where you have high aspirations to do maybe the children's museum on a Saturday or something like that, and you're like, why don't I just take the kids, even though that's a tall order, there are 8 kids, but you take them, and I have a little bit of quiet, and then after a little bit of quiet, I'm able to sort of find myself with a bit of creativity, and I clean the house and get excited to see you guys again and miss you.
Never hurts when a husband cleans the house. A mom that I coached in the past, she also is supporting a spouse with mental illness, and she shared with me that she used to be so frustrated about Saturday mornings because she would expect him to be up and ready, help with the chores, help with the girls, da 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 da. And then she shared that a huge stress point was relieved when she finally realized that if I just took the girls out and then came home later in the morning, her husband would be up, it would not be intense, he would have made coffee and cleaned, and she'd be coming back into a very positive environment. And then had that quality time that maybe she was sort of picturing with this whole Saturday morning routine. And so then when she released that expectation, it really improved her situation. And so I think that's really important. Every individual couple, every individual family is going to be different. This is also going to be impacted obviously by how many children you have, where you live, the kinds of activities you do. But I think another discussion point in this that's really important is being very conscious and selective about the kinds of activities you take on. If you've been following me for a while, you know that a huge reason, and I'll put that video right up here for you, we moved to Southwest Florida for a slower pace of life.
This particular smaller town where we moved to, slower pace of life, a little bit more sunshine, some of those things just created a bit more space in our day to not have as much triggers, I guess, for anxiety.
Now, not everybody can move to Florida. Like, we're not trying to be, that's not the only solution. But I do think that thinking about, like, for example, how many activities do I do every evening? How many groups am I personally volunteering in or involved in? How much hectic, busy coming and going is happening, and how much control do I have over it? Here's the thing. We have a lot of control over how we spend our time. We have a lot of choice. And not only do we have a lot of choice, we have a lot of choice in how we respond to it. Being aware of what are the different stressors or voluntary stress points that could be brought into a family, and being brave enough to say, okay, you know what, in this season we're not doing competitive swimming, or in this season we are going to forego hockey, or in this season I'm going to step down from the PTA, but maybe I'll come back later on. I think that's also really important.
Another thing I think, with the people who ask the question about how to parent with mental illness, I think they want to know specifically about strategies around maybe when the kids are stressing you out, but also how to talk to your kids about mental illness. And I just want to say, for us, our kids all being 10 and under, we don't talk about mental illness in really explicit terms at this point, because I don't think there's an age appropriate way to talk about these things. So if I'm having a particularly difficult week or a couple of rough days back to back, I may say things like, or at least I might say things like, Daddy's got to take a little bit of time. Daddy's not feeling that well. And sometimes I'll even just describe things that are part of it, but not necessarily all of it. It might be like, Daddy's got a headache, or Daddy didn't sleep that well. And so Daddy's going to take a little bit extra time. And they can understand that and empathize with that. If it was a period like what I experienced when we were waiting our third child, where it's week upon week upon week of difficulty, then for the older children, we might have to open up that conversation and talk about what depression is, what it means, so that they understand that and have a context for what's going on, and not blame themselves for what's happening. I think that's a really important thing. Is we even when we're not explaining in explicit terms, we can tell our kids, Daddy's having a rough day today. It's not your fault. Daddy's had a rough night. That's not your fault. So Daddy's just gonna take a little bit of time to himself.
It's funny. I was just having a conversation with our oldest about how sometimes when people get overwhelmed, they need to be left alone. Mm-hmm. And I think that the language that we personally use around emotions, they definitely understand that the same way that you can be sick, and have a broken leg and need to take some time off, you can have an emotional illness. Like you can be overwhelmed, for example. That's a word that's used quite a bit in our house. Like, oh, mommy's feeling overwhelmed, or that was a very overwhelming experience, for example. That it's okay to then take some time because you're overwhelmed. Another phrase that I use a lot because it's very important to me, it's okay that you're sad. Do you want to talk about it? Like, not to ever diminish a feeling. It's okay that you're frustrated. I would be frustrated too. So I think we have a lot of conversation about emotions being okay. And so I think in our family, that is something that will continue. We will continue to just treat mental health like health, the same way that if you needed to go to the doctor to check out a broken leg, you can go to a doctor in order to address what's going on inside your head. Okay, so now we're doing something that is a very, very important mental health self-care thing. We are going on date night. Honey, do you love date night?
I love date night.
So I asked people on Instagram what questions they might have regarding parenting and mental illness. And one of the questions that came in was, what do you do when Josh gets anxious and the kids are around? So what do we do, honey, when you get anxious and the kids are around?
Well, one thing, there's things that I can do and there's things that we can do. Just 3 practical examples. One is simply just taking a deep breath when I'm feeling it, like the anxiety. It's like just a kind of pushing it out and visualizing how it's like I'm pushing out like stress. I'm pushing out the anxiety, the difficulty. And apparently that does have a physiological response. So that's one of my tactics. Another one is, rather than start getting in cycles of negative thinking, I actually will tell myself a positive thing. So my go-to line is, anybody would find this overwhelming right now. There are lots of overwhelming moments, as Lisa was talking about, and there's times where I have got caught in negative thinking where it's like, why am I so overwhelmed? Why do I find life so overwhelming? Why can't I be stronger and whatnot? And I've switched that to say, you know what, anybody would find this overwhelming. Last night I was wrestling with a toddler to get back to bed. It was about 6 or 7 times, and I would just tell myself, you know what, anybody would find this overwhelming. This is difficult. And then a third one is to see whether I can still do something, productive that's less intense. So we pray rosary as a family, but at times it's basically trying to pray while also, trying to deal with a lot of chaos and disciplining of small kids who struggle to keep focus. Sometimes I'll take a couple of them for a walk and I'll continue to pray, but in a less intense way. So those are some strategies I think that can help me personally. What we do as a couple is we'll sometimes create space, like you said, a timeout.
Yeah. So sometimes I'll literally say, Josh, you need to go give yourself a timeout. And we've been married long enough and doing this long enough that we know it's like not to take it, like he knows to not take it personally. Wouldn't you say? Like it doesn't even.
It wouldn't be helpful, you know. And this is another thing when you have, you know, depression or anxiety or whatever, you're not always seeing how it's affecting you, and it can actually be freeing to have someone say, you know what, you seem a little bit stressed right now. Why don't you take a moment? You know, I trust Lisa to help kind of police things like that. And it also works the other way, because anybody can get stressed or overwhelmed. But we try to encourage each other to take time when it's needed and do our best to make up for what's missing.
Let's go get something to eat. It's date night time.
Yeah.
Another question that I was asked on Instagram is, how do you avoid fighting or escalating things in front of the kids?
Right.
So
when you're anxious and whatnot, you choose to. It kind of flows from the previous question, but you think about what it was like to have conflict in front of the kids, and you realize that they don't need that. You don't need that. And it's not urgent to fix every potential conflict right in the moment. In fact, we found it's impossible. So we take time. We say to each other, let's not do this right now in front of the kids. Let's talk about this a little bit later. It's not like let's avoid this and this isn't important, but let's table this for now. Or if it is possible, can we just step into another room and talk about this, if that would be helpful?
It takes a lot of self-control, and of course you can't always step into another room depending on your situation. But yeah, it's a choice. The same way that I could like nag or not nag, or the same way that I could speak harshly to my children or not speak harshly. It's a choice. Okay, it's time to shift our focus to date night.
Hey.
If you found this video helpful, I have made for you a playlist, and just go click right on it so that you can see more videos on the topic of mental health, depression and anxiety, and marriage. See you on the other side. Hey, and thanks for being in my video.
Oh, my pleasure.
There's always hope. Cheers, honey.
Cheers.